Oh my goodness. I see a nerd.
Open your mind and realize that your beautiful world could take my life. And I'm sinking under, drowning faster. Please just let me breathe. The air is leaving and I'm...
Dude, this build looks sick for mobbing. Yo, guys, what is up? Max from Borderlands 4 video, and today we're going over Hammer Down Amon. Now, this is a build that I've kind of always wanted to play, and in the most recent patch, they buffed a lot of the things that we're using, so I wanted to give it another go because it was pretty weak beforehand, and the build now is very, very fun for mobbing. It clears out drill sites. You can do bossing on it. I'm going to be honest, even with the buffs, I still think it needs a lot of love. The MOLTEN slam does good damage against the mobs and stuff. However, it's still not a super reliable tool for bossing. However, we can still use some of the tricks that we've done from other melee builds to make the build kill bosses very quickly with groundbreaker shenanigans. And then the rest of the time, we're just slamming everything with our hammer and using our fire fist. It's a pretty cool build. It's very fun. Definitely not Amon's strongest, but it's a playstyle that I've been really enjoying. So I wanted to break it down for y'all. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's do this. So let's do an overview of the build, and then we'll get into the specifics. So to start, we are going to be using the Forge Master class mod. This reads that all Forge skills can be used once while on cooldown. This basically gives us double the use time of our MOLTEN slam, so we can constantly spam it out on enemies. And we're getting a ton of cooldown just by meleeing enemies. We're going to be using Fist of Stone. Whenever Amon deals melee damage, restore a percentage of Forge skill cooldown. Melee attacks double this. So if you're dealing an actual melee attack, for example, your action skill, if you're hitting an enemy with Onslaughter, you get 10% per punch. And this is just off of the top. So you're restoring a ton of cooldown per punch. You need to punch enemies 3 or 4 times before this is fully refilled. And you get 2 uses while it's on cooldown. So you're just slamming all the time, which is really fun. Now, I personally like just using my fist for this. We messed around using the Forge drones as a way to proc this melee hit. However, I just didn't think it was worth it, and we were losing a lot of damage having to go to these drones. So we're really just fully focused on Red Tree with this build. The other thing that we're going to be using on this setup is we're going to be using Onslaughter to punch things, hit them really hard. It gives us bonus incendiary damage. It makes us move faster. And for mobbing, we're going to be using Pyroclast so that we can upkeep our action skill and never have to leave it. And then for bossing, we're going to be using Felfrost because it allows us to hit way harder, and it's going to build up way stronger groundbreaker procs for us. So not the most complicated build. You basically just punch and hammer, but that's how a bonk build should feel. There's not any super crazy underlying mechanics that we've got going on here. But for our skill tree, we're going to put points in Discombobulate. This gives us more melee crit chance, super helpful. We then put points into Tritanium Knuckles for more melee and skill damage. Our hammer is melee damage, and it is considered a skill, so this is big damage for our MOLTEN slam and also our action skill. We put some points into what burns within for some extra incendiary damage. I put Forged in Steel. This isn't totally necessary, but it allows you to because we are slamming our skill so much, you're basically unkillable on this setup. Plus, with just 1 point into the best defense, a percentage of our melee damage that we're dealing is going to give us overshield. We want our overshield as much as we can on this build because we're going to be using a Watts for dinner to get bonus shock damage, which is with our fire damage and our cryo damage, allowing us to deal 3 elements. So we don't really have any issues with elemental eater enemies, and fighting a shielded armored enemy doesn't slow us down too much. So for big points, we're going to be going into the fray. Amon gains increased damage dealt and damage reduction based on his distance from the enemy. The closer to the enemy, the greater the bonus. This allows us to get tanky and do more damage. Harbinger gives us even more melee damage and more maximum shield capacity, which is very nice. And then that brings us to Molten Roll. Molten Slam gains increased radius and stores damage. Pyres erupt under up to 3 enemies after a delay. Pyres deal additional incendiary melee damage based on the damage stored by Molten Slam, distributed among the remaining targets. So this is going to allow us to hit harder and in a wider area, and then based on the damage that we deal in that slam, it'll burst up and hit a boss or an enemy. And if you don't kill them with Molten Slam, a lot of times these like pyres that come up will break enemies. This from my testing, cannot proc Groundbreaker, but it can build Groundbreaker. So a lot of times we're using this, and this won't kill like a boss, but you can then use this to feed into like your punches to like do actual damage. Then we have to use Berserk on this build. It's going to give us bonus cryo damage with our melee attacks with There Is Only Red to give us even more bonus cryo damage. This basically is a bonus element that is allowing us to stack Groundbreaker, which is going to make our punches hit really, really hard. And we're also using My Touch is Death so that we can fully stack Berserk against bosses, which is going to allow us to hit really, really hard. We need My Touch is Death, and we're going to be using the Fish Slap to proc up 10 ranks of There Is Only Red, which is allowing us to get big Groundbreaker procs. And then lastly, we're going to be using a Watts for Dinner on this build, which is going to allow us to deal bonus shock damage so we can shock enemies. And we're also going to be getting a bunch of burn on enemies from Pyroclast, as well as just like punching enemies and lighting them on fire. This is going to give us more crit chance and more crit damage so that our slams can crit. Fist of Stone allows us to get the Forge skill cooldown so we can constantly be slamming. And then Electrical Fire is just, you know, we're not doing a ton of dot damage on this build, but it is allowing us to get constant uptime of Catastrophe, which is really nice. Now note, there is a certain skill for this build that I messed around with that I really wanted to love. However, Raging Inferno is currently bugged. This reads that action skill damage has a chance to critically hit, and critical hits from direct action skill damage apply burns. This would have been sick on this build. However, it's currently bugged in the same way that Blackout is bugged. So more than 1 point doesn't do anything for this specific skill. However, once this gets fixed, you could go an avenue of going to Green Tree to pick up Raging Inferno to proc big, massive burn dots based off of damage dealt. And I think that could be sick. However, because it's bugged, it's just not really worth going to. And so that's kind of why we're fully spec'd into Red Tree right now. Now, I do want to mention that Force of Nature allows you to basically build up prime damage on enemies with your guns, and then you can use the hammer to slam and detonate those enemies. And the like detonation build we've actually made already. That is what Wildfire Amon is. It's a Force of Nature build that you use your guns and status effects to prime enemies for a bunch of damage, and then you use like a Slam or Stormcutter to proc that, and it'll one-shot most things in the game. However, in order to like really build a good detonation build with this, you want to fully spec into gun damage because that's what it deals. And if you go that route, then your Molten Slam doesn't really hit for anything. You're just using it as utility to like proc things. So like showing on screen should be a kill where, you know, it looks like Molten Slam's one-shotting a boss, but it's really just detonating our spread launcher, basically, again, for a multiplier. So if you want to do a like detonation build with Force of Nature, I'll link you to Wildfire Amon. That build is really strong. However, the like Molten Slams and your melee damage don't do anything because it's a gun build. It's mainly just utility. However, it like looks like it's doing damage. So that's why we're respected very differently. I wanted to make the Molten Slams on their own do good damage without having to like prime things and have to use my guns on this build. This is like a melee only setup. For weapons on this build, I mainly just hold out the Hot Slugger just because it does a bunch of damage if we need to like shoot an immunity bubble or something that we can't really damage with our guns, or if an enemy has the like headshot only modifier. Hot Slugger is just nice to kill them if you do need to shoot your gun. For our like Repkits, we're going to be using a triple bypass. This is really helpful because we're not really spec'd into much action skill cooldown, but with caffeine from the specializations, we can boom, 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 stim a bunch of Repkits into ourselves and get our action skill back immediately. For the class mod, we're using the Forge Master. I don't think my roll on this is particularly good, but it does, the main thing we're using this class mod for is for more slams of our hammer. Technically, you could probably squeak out a bit more boss damage if you wanted to throw on a like shatter weight However, I really did want to lean into like the slam stuff because we've made 2 melee builds now already using the shatter weight with more like berserk damage, hence why we're using Forge Master. The shield that we're rocking is going to be a Watts for dinner. This allows us to get bonus shock damage. I tried this build with the heavyweight. Heavyweight's melee damage is additive with all of our other percentage damage increases. However, getting a bonus element and shock, which we basically have no damage of, helps way more. It allows us to cut through shields, and it's going to be up all the time, giving us a constant bonus element on all of our damage, which is sick. Mine is just rolled with Siphon, so I have a chance to get some extra overshield. Power booster for some extra gun damage. The gun damage doesn't really matter. For your enhancement, I've got gun damage and gun splash and gun fire rate. Not super ideal. There's not a ton of things on your enhancement that really benefit us. Technically, gun damage can be helpful. However, your enhancement's not really important on this build. And lastly, we're using the Slippy. The Slippy procs melee damage. It will stack up all of our kill skills very quickly. It'll basically instantly give you back your Forge skill if you want it. But we're mainly using it for Touch of Death stacking so that we can get There Is Only Red fully built up before we go fight a boss. It'll also just do a bunch of damage, and I've got it with the nuke on so that it does a bunch of radius, and all of its hits are going to be overlapping. This will build Groundbreaker for you. It will not trigger Groundbreaker, but it will allow us to, after throwing our grenade, to run in and hit really, really hard with our melee damage. For our firmware, we're going to be rocking 3 Action Fists. This gives us melee damage, action skill damage, and on melee kill, more action skill damage. Our like slams and our punches are going to be dealing action skill damage, so this is huge for us, and it's pretty good upkeep. We're using 2 real big fist for more melee damage. Note that the melee kills triggering a Nova is cool, but the radius on them is so small that like most of the time this just doesn't do anything. So that's why we went for 3 Action Fist for the extra action skill damage. For our specializations, we're rocking big points into Daredevil for now with caffeine so that we have good action skill uptime. We're not really spec'd into many gun bonuses, so I'm not using I Am a Gun. We are going to be using Bare Arms just so we can get a little bit of benefit from our enhancement. There's not much else to really rock on this particular setup. If I had more points, we could potentially go down to Contamination, just not high enough level on Amon. Honed Mind is a huge pickup. This is a bunch of crit damage and a chance to crit, but once again, we're building a bunch of crit chance whenever we're burning and shocking enemies, so we actually get good value out of Honed Mind. And then the most important point for this entire build to like really function is Groundbreaker. Groundbreaker is a must-have on any melee build, and Amon has a really, really easy time of building and proccing Groundbreaker on this build. As long as you have Berserk up, your Onslaughter punches, your Rocket Punch will hit really hard. This can both build and detonate Groundbreaker if you are using Berserk, which is why it's so strong. And then we can use Molten Slam just to build more Groundbreaker and then detonate that with our punches. So your fist will one-shot most enemies on this particular setup. Guys, that is going to do it for the build guide. I hope you enjoyed. This is a very fun build to play. However, it still needs some really big buffs and love, in my opinion. The targeting on Onslaughter can be wonky. The Slam still needs, honestly, quite a few buffs. It is a build that can function and work at UVH5, and it's really fun for running drill sites because you're basically unkillable, and you one-shot most drill site enemies. However, if you're going to take this to farm some of the toughest bosses in the game, that is where this build can absolutely struggle, and I hope Gearbox does some even bigger buffs for Amon, particularly around his action skills and his melee damage, because I think he desperately still needs it. But guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will catch y'all in the next one. Take care. Peace.